Brain love really needs to be felt. Serve me on, don't make me feel on myself. Brain food, brain sleep, neurology health. Brain love on me. I need you to assess, diagnose, and treat. Reveal what's underneath. Some brain love will give me peace. Prescribe me some doc. Ooh, baby. Brain love on me. Brain love. Brain love. Brain love.
There we go. Oops, I was muted. Ooh, hey, guys. Are you ready to take the couch? So it's time for another episode of the Brain Love Podcast. You guys know who I am. I get some participation tonight, but I don't know. So tonight I'm talking about a sensitive topic. I'm talking many things to do with Black women. We are talking domestic violence. We are talking also about the dynamics between Coach Gino from UConn and Coach Don Staley. Just a little bit before I get into tonight's topic, which is evil versus mental illness. So let's first do the easy stuff first. So going into the topic of NCAA women's college basketball, big ups to UCLA. They were able to defeat the South Carolina Gamecocks. They were able to defeat South Carolina. Unfortunately, I was rooting for South Carolina, but that didn't go too well. So everyone saw over the weekend what happened. There is a long-standing rivalry between UConn and South Carolina. And both coaches, I mean, to be a coach, you have to have a strong personality, right? So I think people would agree that both coaches have strong personalities. But this in no way was Don Staley's fault. Gino was very unprofessional and inappropriate. And so Gino has in the past made remarks that were perceived as, let's say, dismissive. And some people would even say tone deaf, and has been quite critical of South Carolina, their women's basketball team. So one would ask, how is a man coaching women's basketball? But that would be discriminatory not to allow that, right? Because women want to be in all spaces that are spaces for men. And so I guess we have to reciprocate and expect the same from men. They want to be in our space as well. So there was an ego there, different leadership styles, unprofessionalism, but not necessarily, and not, I'm not even going to say necessarily, but not mental illness. But so let's make a segue to the other topic that I've been discussing this weekend, and that is evil versus mental illness. And before I switch gears and change the topic, I would just like to say that Black women, at times when we see things, and I'll speak from my perspective as a Black woman, it can be triggering when certain things happen, when certain things occur, when you watch certain things happen, it can trigger you. So for people who have been watching and responded to my post, that picture of Coach Don Staley, and you had some strong verbiage, you had strong comments regarding what Gino did and what Gino did not do. Just keep this in mind. Black women have had to endure a lot in America, such as Black men as well, the same for Black men, but I'm speaking from the perspective of a Black woman. We have had to endure a lot. If you're a Black woman in America, I'm sure you've been discriminated against probably many, many times. So when you see an older white man chastising a Black woman who has earned her right to be there in that gym, it's kind of triggering. I can think back to my first discriminatory experience. I was in pre-K, living in New Jersey, and I was on the playground with some of my classmates, and they excluded me from playing Dukes of Hazzard because I was Black. The young man, the boy who was playing, said, well, there are no black people in Dukes of Hazzard, so you cannot play. So, and this has been going on most of my life, including in medical school as a medical student, scrubbing in on surgical cases, being discriminated against by the white male resident. But I'm not going to digress, because tonight I want to talk about evil versus mental illness. And I hope some of you who commented on my post, I hope that some of you will actually come in and join me on the couch. I would love to admit you on the couch so that you can express yourselves. You can ask questions any questions that you may have. Um, this is a tough conversation. There are horrific events that happen quite often. And at times people are quick to say the words mental illness, but everything is not mental illness. Some things are just something else entirely. I mentioned today that what we saw, the information we experienced regarding the vice mayor of Coral Springs being murdered. Her name is Nancy Mateer Bowen, the vice mayor of Coral Springs. She was found dead in her home on April 1st, so 4 days ago. It's been all over the news, the national news, the local news. It's been all over the news. And so people are probably wondering what could have caused such a travesty. And I've seen some idiotic comments about her being a black woman and black women in their mouths. I've seen comments about maybe she cheated. I've seen comments about maybe it's the way that she cheated him. Her husband is Stephen Bowen. He has been arrested and charged with premeditated murder and evidence tampering. According to police reports, I received this from the New York Post. He allegedly shot her multiple times, and then he attempted to conceal the crime. Depending on where you acquire the information, there are some reports that mention something about him putting her in a trash bag and putting, I don't know if some of her body parts outside in a trash bag and a trash can, but also that that police found her lifeless body inside of her home. So obviously, I do not have the police report in front of me. Well, it's not obvious. I do not have the police report in front of me, but it cannot be denied that there are allegations that he took this woman's life, that he murdered her. So according to one of his own relatives, he did this because he couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't take it anymore. I put that in quotations. He was quoted as saying that. So now the case is being investigated as a domestic violence case, and there's no confirmed motive. No confirmed motive publicly established. Let me say that. No motive publicly established yet. There were no, and then, so I'm going to go on to say this. So this is, I just gave you the setup, the basis for tonight's talk. That is it. The husband of the Coral Springs vice mayor, his name is Stephen Bowen, was arrested and is being charged with premeditated murder and evidence tampering, because allegedly he shot his wife, the now late Nancy Mateer Bowen, multiple times and attempted to conceal the crime. According to everything that I'm reading and what I see online, there are no or were no or are no widely known public signs of marital issues. Again, public signs of marital issues or marital discord, according to family and public perception. That was on people.com. So I'm going to share my references so it does not seem like I'm making this stuff up. And someone just said on IG, you never know what's going on behind closed doors. That's absolutely correct. Because oftentimes we do not want to air our dirty laundry. So we will present the healthy side of our lives or the healthy side of our relationships and handle things behind closed doors. So we're not arguing in public and all of these things. According to the husband's mother, she also mentioned that she was not aware of any marital issues. Allow me to also say that this tragedy happened just months after the vice mayor lost her brother to suicide. That was also in People, that was on the website people.com. So apparently, the vice mayor's brother died by suicide just months before she was murdered. So my heart goes out to Nancy's mother. My heart goes out to Nancy's family. Um, the parents lost their son to suicide, and now their daughter has died because she was murdered. So it has been very unsettling for a lot of people, a lot of community members who knew Vice Mayor Nancy to be a very compassionate, high functioning. So even with whatever was going on behind closed doors and in her marriage, she was considered a high functioning and deeply engaged in service, deeply engaged. So whatever was happening in her household and her marriage, she did not allow that to affect her work ethic, her activity, and there was no narrative of chaos or dysfunction around her. That came from NBC6 South Florida. Shout out to Jawan Strader. So I ascertained that from NBC6 South Florida. She was considered high functioning and deeply engaged, and there was no known chaos or dysfunction, which really is what we see in a lot of situations that involve domestic violence, where people will say the abuser seems so nice, whether it's a man or a woman, and that the abused, they didn't know anything was going on because people will put up a front like everything is okay. Now, transitioning to mental illness, and I put it in quotations because people have mentioned that something must be wrong with him. He must be mentally ill because of doing something so heinous. But this does not mean he has a mental illness, because typically the vast majority of people with mental illness, they are not violent. Allow me to say that again. The vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent. They are not violent. Mental illness does not equate to violence. Allow me to say that again. Mental illness does not equate to violence. Mental illness does not equate to violence. Violence like this is statistically more associated with factors like control issues, domestic violence dynamics, access to weapons, which, if you go on this guy's social media, you will see everyone is talking about the number and the amount of weapons that this man, the amount of weapons this guy owned. He owned a lot of weapons, a lot of guns. He showcased himself out shooting at gun ranges, out in the open. So he enjoyed weapons. He had access to weapons. And if you're in a mental health space, you know that someone who has access to weapons could be a risk factor for dying by suicide. Not necessarily homicide, but obviously if someone has homicidal ideations, you would ask the question, do they have access to weapons? He had access to a lot of weapons. And more than likely, he has some sort of personality pathology. So meaning some sort of maladaptive personality traits, possibly has a personality disorder. I don't know him. I don't know if I've ever been around him. I've never interacted with him unless I didn't, or I don't recognize that I interacted with him. So really, to know if someone has personality pathology or personality disorder, you have to have been around that person or interacted with that person. So I'd like to take a comment from Instagram. Someone states, but doesn't everyone have access to weapons, whether it's showing it off or posting it? Of course, someone could have access to weapons and we not know it. Of course, a lot of people have weapons and you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know what I have in my office right now You just don't know. And so people are who know better, you don't want to show your hand. You don't want people to know what you have. In the event they run up in your house, they run up in your office. But if you've been following me for a little bit of time, you know that I am in the Army. I go to the gun range with the Army, but I also go to the gun range on my own. And I have posted video or pictures, or in my story have included um, events where I'm at the gun range or I'm shooting. And so, yeah, that is absolutely true. Everyone who has access to weapons, this person said, but doesn't everyone have access to weapons, whether showing it off or posting it? Everyone with weapons, they're not posting or showing it off. There's another comment here: pain inside a person does not make them a threat, it makes them human. Right, yes. But when you do something like this, you kill your wife in cold blood and the body is dead inside the home and you go to sleep and you sleep soundly overnight. I I think there's a whole nother element to that other than being human, having pain inside. There's a whole nother level to that. So supposedly, and I'll say supposed, the uncle, I believe it was, or a family member of the husband reported that the patient told him when he asked why this happened, the murderer, I think I just said patient, the murderer said, I couldn't take it anymore. And I'll quote that: I couldn't take it anymore. This is not a diagnosis. This statement certainly reflects distress and it reflects tolerance failure. So, someone asked me earlier on my Facebook post if not having emotional intelligence or lack of emotional intelligence and failure to exhibit or to maintain self control could be a factor in why this person did this to his wife. Sure, it can. Um, because, yeah, this seems like low frustration tolerance that really became deadly for his wife. But at the same time, I don't want people to think that someone who has emotional intelligence or has displayed emotional intelligence during certain situations that they could not do this, because this guy, maybe he has emotional intelligence. He has an EQ, as we call it. He's been able to manage stressful situations and cope out in the open in front of the public. But probably when he gets home, I would imagine that he probably becomes undone, or he decompensates a little bit, or he probably, who knows, maybe I imagine those temper tantrums. These are things, characteristics, or traits that we know about people who are abusers in domestic violence situations. So he said he couldn't take it anymore. Obviously, feeling overwhelmed is human. Choosing lethal violence is a behavioral, moral, criminal factor. It's not a diagnosis. Lethal violence or killing someone is not a diagnosis or a mental illness. So, mental illness can explain a behavior, but it does not excuse all behavior. Some acts reflect entitlement, which there seemed to have been some of that, control, wanting to control situations. Maybe there was some rage involved, and maybe some capacity for harm. So people have been saying that he was jealous of her and he didn't like where her career was taking her. Apparently, she was weeks away from announcing her candidacy for Congress. So she was planning to run for Congress. And so who knows if that was the impetus or not, or if that was the straw that finally pushed him to basically execute his wife. So someone asked, how do you know that you might not be in the right mind to have a concealed weapon permit? How do you know that you might not be in the right mind to have a weapon, to have a concealed weapon permit? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what you're saying. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to understand it, but feel free. Let's see. I'm going on my platform on IG. please feel free to request to come on so you can explain that if you feel comfortable. Would love for you to come on and explain your question, what you mean by that. So let's see if I can try to interpret what you're asking. So if you live in a state where there's a concealed weapon permit requirement by law, so to own a weapon or to have a gun, you have to have a concealed weapons permit. So in most states, we have the right to bear arms and we can have a gun inside of our home. You just cannot um, walk around with that gun. You can't have it on your person. You can't carry it in your bag because when you do that, that's considered a concealed weapon. So in many states, including Florida, we are allowed to carry a concealed weapon. And we no longer have to have a permit. It used to be that we had to have a permit. When you apply for a permit, there's certain questions that the application will ask you, such as, do you have a mental illness? And I'm probably paraphrasing because I can't remember. I applied for a concealed weapons permit right at the beginning of the pandemic. Um, and sometimes you don't have to apply for that permit depending on your state law. If you are law enforcement, so when I worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I did not have to apply for a concealed weapons permit. Some states, if you're in the military, like the Army, you do not have to apply for a concealed weapons permit. But anyway, if you have to apply for that, there are questions on the application that ask you about mental defects or mental health defects, about a history of mental illness, about being admitted to, some will go in depth and ask if you've ever been Baker acted, because in the state of Florida, to admit someone to the hospital against their will or involuntarily, you have to Baker Act them. So sometimes they will ask you questions such as that. And if you answer yes or it's affirmative, then that could lead to them denying your weapons permit. Someone asked how to call in. I am giving you the number. So that could lead to them denying you a weapons permit. Now, when someone is applying for weapons permit, unless they are actively psychotic or actively manic, you won't know if there's anything wrong with them. You won't know if they're in their right frame of mind or in their right mind, as was posed in this question. So, of course, someone could be in between bouts of severe depression or in between bouts of mania or in between bouts of hypomania or not be psychotic, or maybe they were psychotic in the past or manic in the past and never got admitted to the hospital. For some reason, they just never got admitted, because at times everyone doesn't get admitted during every episode. If they're able to hide it, or if it goes unnoticed. And so sometimes things can go unnoticed because there are several different types of illnesses that cause psychosis. So it's possible it can go unnoticed. That being said, yes, someone who has mental health defects, mental illness, mental health challenges could apply for a concealed weapons permit and get that concealed weapons permit, and then use it later to either die by suicide or to kill someone else. That is a strong possibility. We do know, again, I will reiterate, that people with mental illness are not violent people. I said that at the beginning of this live, that mental illness does not equate to violence. So, all of that being said, not every violent act is a symptom, and we know that most often they are decisions. It seems like this guy, the murderer, the husband, made a decision to kill his wife because he was charged with premeditated, which means he made a plan to kill her. So prior to him going to her home and murdering her, he planned this. I think he called into his job and said some crap or called her and said he was having an anxiety attack to get access to her. So let's stop calling everything mental illness. Someone said, well, because this crime is such a travesty and so heinous, he has to have a mental illness. That is just not true. That's not true. Some people have a diseased brain or they're deranged because of how they were raised, but it did not amount to developing, let's say, bipolar or schizophrenia or major depressive disorder or PTSD. So that is why I am talking about this on this live, because it's not true that if you do something like this means you have to have a mental illness. This is not illness, this is evil. Evil is not synonymous with mental illness. Planning a murder, carrying it out, and attempting to conceal it reflects number one, awareness, number two, intent, and number three, a choice. So I'm not going to get into all the details about capacity and the insanity plea. The insanity plea is a hard thing to prove, but there are certain criteria that people have to meet in order to use the insanity plea as their defense when they're being accused of something like this or accused of anything. We have to stop labeling every horrific act as mental illness simply because it makes us uncomfortable to call it what it is. Some acts are not symptoms, again, they are decisions. And as a psychiatrist, a board certified psychiatrist, let me be clear. Mental illness does not inherently lead to violence. I posted that earlier today and yesterday. Mental illness does not inherently lead to violence, and it certainly does not explain every act of brutality. Now, based on what we have seen on the news, I mentioned the New York Post on CNN. Or did it make CNN? The New York Post, the local news. It did make CNN. I'm sorry, it did. So based on what we've seen, there does not appear to have been a loss of reality. He did not seem too confused to me because he was able to create a reason to get to her, to leave work to get to her, to shoot and kill her, to then try to conceal it or to cover it up, not to report it. He then went to a family member's, I believe it was the uncle's house. So he didn't seem too confused because he was able to get to her house. He remembered how to get there. He remembered how to get to his uncle's house. He was driving around, didn't get pulled over because of being confused in traffic. He remembered how to drive and how to get from, place A to place B. So he didn't seem too confused. There was premeditation according to the police, and there was intent and there was action according to what has been reported. So we cannot misuse mental illness as a blanket explanation for this behavior that appears to be deliberate, controlled, and harmful. Now, the word evil. I know people like to try to avoid having certain conversations. We try to avoid having conversations that involve the Bible, that involve religion. But at times you just cannot avoid these types of conversations. They're sensitive. And evil, really, you don't necessarily have to reference the Bible about evil. At its core, evil is not a clinical diagnosis. Evil is a moral and philosophical label. We use it to describe, and I'm sure you can think of some people who have committed evil crimes. If you ever watch 48, if you ever watch Unsolved Crimes or Unsolved Mysteries, you'll see acts that are evil. It's intentionally harmful. We can check the box on that check. It was intentionally harmful. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't out with his wife in the field shooting and accidentally shot her. This was intentionally harmful, consciously chosen, it seems, and there was a lack for empathy or remorse. Well, perhaps. Maybe now he's remorseful. Who knows? I didn't talk to him. but it's also disproportionately cruel or destructive. So that's what we know about a lot of evil acts. And this certainly seems to fit what I just described. It fits. So, evil is the willful choice to cause harm despite having the capacity to know better. Let me say that again. Evil is the willful choice to cause harm despite having the capacity to know better. People know better when they're doing evil things. It's a willful choice to cause harm despite having the capacity to know better. There we go. So don't forget that. In psychiatry, we don't diagnose evil, but we do assess things like impulse control, reality testing, personality structure and maladaptive traits, trauma history, substance use. So I'm sure now that he is detained, he will probably start singing like a bird. He'll start talking about all of his challenges as a kid growing up, as a teenager, the things that he didn't get, the ways that he was abused in the past. He'll start sharing all of those things. Mental illness can impair judgment. Evil implies preserved judgment with harmful intent. So it does seem that he had preserved judgment. So don't get it confused. People often get mental illness confused with evil acts when the act is shocking, when you can't emotionally process it because you want to call it something, and you want an explanation that feels less disturbing. In my opinion, that's what I think. That's exactly what I think. We are afraid of calling it the way it is. You want an explanation that's not so unsettling to you. You want an explanation that is less disturbing. So it's easy to say he must have been mentally ill or she must have been mentally ill. Not all harmful acts are evil, of course, and not all mental illness equates to being harmless. So I'm not trying to convince you of that, but I just wanted to share those clinical nuances with you because not every violent act is driven by mental illness. Some are driven by control, entitlement, rage, or calculated intent. And I said that in the beginning of this live. Evil is not a diagnosis. Evil is what we call intentional, aware, and harmful. Evil is not confusion, it's a choice. When people do things like this, they are making a choice to do this. Some people are not out of touch with reality. They are in full control of harmful decisions. Someone said to me on Facebook, well, how do you know we don't know what was going on with him? Yes, we do. Yes, we know. And this is why oftentimes when police departments are trying to solve crimes, they will bring in psychiatrists. They will bring in mental health experts because we can do something called psychological autopsies to assess the behaviors that are present. And those are the behaviors leading up to the act. It could be the behaviors in the course of the act as well. Evil lives where empathy is absent and intent is present. Let me say that again. Evil lives where empathy is absent and intent is present. I learned that during the 8 years that I worked in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So evil lies where empathy is absent. A lot of psychopaths and people with antisocial personality disorder, they lack empathy. You also see a lack of empathy in folks who have narcissistic personality disorder. So I could go into narcissism, but this is not a conversation about that. This is not a live about narcissistic PD, personality disorder, but narcissistic personality disorder, oftentimes it involves lack of empathy. There is an overlap. Why do we mislabel mental illness? And I mentioned it's because the truth, it's uncomfortable. It's easier for us to say something must have been wrong with him. Something was wrong with her. We don't want to admit that evil exists, but just like someone said on one of my posts, if you have good, you have evil. If you have good, you have bad. If you have good, then of course you can have evil. It's easier to accept that something must have been wrong with them instead of that a person chose to do this. People choose to do these types of things because they have lost their will for anything. They no longer have a reason to live. They don't care what happens to them. And sometimes they do care what happens to them. Sometimes they do have a will to live. It's just that they have chosen to participate. Look at Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson. They chose to conduct those evil acts. When we call something mental illness, it gives us distance. It's almost like it explains it away and makes us more comfortable. But in this situation with this person, we are not dealing with pathology. The harm in getting it wrong. When we label every violent act as mental illness, we harm people who are actually living with mental health conditions. The truth is that a vast majority of individuals, I said this in the beginning, with mental illness, they are not violent. When we had these discussions about gun laws, a lot of the folks who were anti-gun law or who did not want to have policies and laws to govern the possession or the ownership of guns, they use mental illness as an excuse. Oh, if we could treat these people with mental illness, oh, if we could keep the guns away from them, we wouldn't have gun violence. That is absolutely the farthest from the truth. Someone asked me, do I believe in God? Absolutely, yes, I do. Absolutely, yes, I do. I absolutely believe in God, and I also believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So, if you don't like it, oh well. Yes, I believe in God. Accountability matters, people. Most people with mental illness are likely to be victims, not perpetrators. So this man, let's say he's in his 30s or his 40s. And I bet you if I were to dig deep or ask his parents for his psychiatric history, or if I went to visit him in Broward's jail and asked him if he's ever been Baker acted or asked him if he was ever admitted to a psychiatric hospital or facility, what do you think the answer would be? The answer would likely be no. Quite possibly. So let's not blur the line between mental illness and evil and violent acts because we're increasing the stigma. That's another reason why I posted, and that's why I'm doing this live, because we unjustifiably increase fear and we increase stigma and we misrepresent our reality by doing this, by calling something like this act mental illness. So I am going to wrap it up because it has been a little over 30 minutes. I just wanted to mention to you guys that people make decisions. People who conduct evil acts make decisions. If we're going to truly understand the human mind, we have to be honest about both sides of it. The part that struggles and the part that chooses. So I know it's uncomfortable, but by labeling things as mental illness, that does not make things clear. The waters are still muddy. So just remember that the waters are still muddy. Someone is asking about Hitler. No comment on Hitler. I'm not discussing Hitler tonight. I'm discussing the Bowen family. I'm discussing Mr. and Mrs. Bowen. I have no comment about Hitler at this time at all. So thank you for joining me tonight on this live. I hope that you'll follow the Brain Love Podcast. It's on all podcast platforms, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Please go and subscribe. And if you'd like to join me as a guest on the podcast, feel free to send me an email, info@drdelvinahelp.com. The doctor is abbreviated, so info, I-N-F-O, at DR Delvinahelp, DELVENAHELP.com. Or you can DM me, send me a message, and tell me that you'd like to come on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Say brain love.